it's hard to overestimate the role that Dr. Murthy has played in the United States in awakening our country to the youth mental health crisis. So he was a two-time Surgeon General under President Obama and under President Biden. And in one of the greatest things that ever happened to the 23 years of Common Sense Media, we finally convinced him to join the board of Common Sense Media. And also to help us, along with some other really great experts, some of whom you're going to hear from today, design the Youth AI Safety Institute that Her Royal Highness Sophie talked about, and that's sort of the underpinnings of what we want to do about AI. So with no further ado, I want to jump in with Vivek, and then we're going to move forward to a couple of other really fascinating conversations. And Margareta, we have the Prime Minister coming, right? Okay. So Vivek's also a dad of 2 kids and a pediatrician and just an all-around awesome person. And my question is this: you actually issued a major warning to the American public about the youth mental health crisis, but the specific impact of social media. This is before AI burst onto the scene in 2023. So 3 years after you made that warning, which was a huge thing in the US, what do you think the evidence showed? How well have we done in dealing with it? And it's clearly you understand it from a US perspective, but it's a global issue. So how do you think we've done since you told the country we have a really big problem on our hands?
Well, thanks so much, Jim. I think we've learned a lot more, and everything that we have learned in terms of cross-sectional studies, longitudinal studies, randomized controlled trials has largely confirmed the fears that we had that social media was in fact not safe for our kids. And this is really important to say because there were many, I remember when I issued that report in 2023 on the impact of social media and youth mental health, there were many who said, well, isn't it too early to issue something like this? Shouldn't we wait for more data until we know with even more certainty? And this is, I think, one of the things that we have to do as a society is to recognize that data is important. We need it. We should seek it out. But there's a point at which you have to draw a line and say there's enough data now for us to act. And the analogy that I was sharing with some folks last night was that, you know, when I worked as a physician in the hospital, when a patient coded, which meant when they went into cardiac arrest, there's an evidence-based algorithm that you use of how to resuscitate them, what medications to give, how to administer chest compressions, etc. But sometimes you get to the end of that algorithm and the patient's heart still has not restarted. So what do? At that point, you don't stop and say, you know what, let's put this on hold for another 5 years until we have some more randomized controlled trials. What you do is you say, I now have to supplement the evidence with my best judgment, and I have to act because a human life is at stake. And it is time when millions and millions of lives are at stake for us to delay taking action, saying we just need more and more and more data. It does not make sense and it's not justifiable. So the data has piled up that we continue to see more harms. But I'll also lastly just say this. As I've traveled the world and to talk about this issue, whether it's been in the UK or in India or in Japan or in other places, what is really interesting to me is that if you had blindfolded me in these conversations with young people across the world, if you blindfolded me and changed their accents, I wouldn't have known which country I was in because they were saying literally the same things. They were talking about the fact that constantly comparing themselves to other people made them feel worse about themselves. They would talk about the fact that they wanted often to reduce how much they used social media per day, but it wasn't easy. It was hard. They would often say, well, if no one else was on social media, it would be a lot easier for me not to be, but it's hard to be the only one who's not on it. So I think that we have seen that the phenomenon is global. We've seen the evidence that there's harm. And my hope is that we will learn from that experience with social media to not repeat the same mistakes with AI, the mistake of acting too late, of not being bold enough to take action, not just as individuals, but as institutions, to actually rein in these harms.
So following on that, so I remember when we first became friends, you were writing a book about loneliness. So why did this is Surgeon General of the United States, wrote a very personal book about loneliness. So, number one, why do you write the book? And number two, how do you think it relates to like the AI chatbot issue that Madika and Chloe and Stephen were talking about, and the chatbot stuff, having a relationship to a machine because there's no human being. The king talked about that, by the way, too, which I thought was pretty cool for the king to say. But why do you write the book about loneliness? That was a very personal book. But explain how you see it relating to AI and chatbots and all this stuff.
Well, can I just ask by a show of hands, how many people know somebody in your life who's struggling with feeling isolated or alone? It's almost everyone. Anywhere I go in the world and I ask this question, almost every hand goes up in the room. And that's because under our very watch, loneliness has become this global crisis. It's silent, it's quiet, it's often hidden in the shadows, but there are people who don't feel that they have the social connections they need in their life. And the social media sort of experience ended up replacing a lot of high quality in-person relationships with online relationships, which were of lower quality. It shifted us from focusing on confidants to focusing on contacts. We went from thinking about friends, right, to thinking about followers. And the truth is, what we all need are a small number of high quality relationships in our life, people we can trust, people with whom we can be ourselves, people with whom we don't have to wear a mask and pretend that we're someone else. And right now, this loneliness crisis is being most acutely felt among young people. Like in the US, it's 1 in 2 young people are actually struggling with loneliness, so 1 in 3 adults. We recently, last year, issued a report from the World Health Organization Commission on Social Connection that I co-chair, drawing attention to this as a more global phenomenon and attributing about 791,000 deaths a year to loneliness. And you might ask, well, how does loneliness kill people? Well, it turns out that when people struggle with a sense of being socially disconnected, it raises their risk of depression, anxiety, and suicide, but it also raises their risk of heart disease by 30%, of dementia by 50% among older people, and the overall mortality impact or life-shortening impact of social disconnection is actually comparable to smoking and obesity. And if this seems surprising, it was surprising to me too when I learned this, but what it all points to is the fact that our connections with each other are not a luxury. They're not just a nice thing to have when you have free time. They're actually as essential to our survival as food and water. And that is why when I think about AI chatbots in particular and how technology has transformed our lives, one of the greatest impacts has been on our relationships, right? And what we cannot afford to do is to allow what happened with social media to progress with AI, this replacement of the human with the machine. There's some places where, yes, AI can be extraordinarily helpful to us. But one thing that I think will be harmful if we allow the wholesale replacement of humans in terms of our friendships, our romantic relationships. There was a recent study that Common Sense was involved in that showed that about a third of adolescents in the US said that they prefer AI chatbot relationships to human relationships. A third. And this is just at the beginning of the AI revolution.
Right.
And that's just deeply concerning because, yes, I understand they may be easier, right? An AI chatbot may not push back against you, tell you what you don't want to hear. But anybody who's ever had a conversation with a friend when you went through, let's say, a difficult breakup or a big disappointment, you know that sometimes your friend tells you something you don't want to hear. Sometimes they say, you know, I don't think you're being reasonable here, or I think you're looking at this the wrong way. And sometimes in the moment you might be annoyed and say, gosh, they don't really get it. But you know, in the long term, we all benefit from having a little bit of friction because friction is how we grow. When you go to the gym and you work out, it's the stress, the friction of lifting something that's heavy that enables your muscles to grow. If you're constantly in an environment where there's no friction, no pushback, if you're in other words, the sycophantic environment that AI creates, that actually is a negative influence on our growth and it doesn't allow us to thrive as human beings.
So let me ask you a question. We're launching, as you well know, that we created this Youth AI Safety Institute because we think that you have to deal with that now, that we didn't do that with social media. The results are in. It's pretty clear what happened. And one of the big focuses is going to be product testing. So next time we're here, we'll show you what we're doing. But we're product testing all the big platforms, all the AI products. The companies, well, you're going to hear from one of the great experts, a couple of the great experts in the world on AI are coming up in the next hour. You can hear what they think about it. But we're going to test those products. And ideally, what we're going to do is test them before they go on the market. That's going to be the big fight with the companies. Because we're testing them now. They don't love it. The guy who runs the testing is going to be part of a discussion this afternoon. But here's my question. So we're also going to do a lot of research. And the third thing we're going to do is a lot of what we call public education, public awareness, which is, because given our reach, we're going to go to parents and teachers and young people all around the world and talk about this. So my question is, and we want to do that here with our friends at Save the Children Denmark as a partner, just like we do it with the NSPCC in the UK. We always do it with local partners who unbelievably speak English as well as you kids do, which I still can't believe. But what would you say the message is going to be, like in 30 seconds or 1 minute, to parents and let's start with adults. What do you tell them about loneliness? What do you tell them about loneliness if we're going to really educate in the context of AI? What do you think the basic message is?
Well, the basic message around loneliness is that we were designed to be together. We weren't designed to be individuals out there on our own, figuring out everything by ourselves, navigating every difficulty, building every sort of career move by ourselves. Like, that is not how we were meant to be. Thousands of years ago, when we were hunters and gatherers, the person who said, you know what, I'm an independent person. I don't need anyone else. I'm just going to do it on my own. You know what happened to that person? That person got eaten by a predator. That person died out of starvation. It was the people who recognized interdependence was the way of life. Those are the people who survived, thrived, and did well. So I think the first thing we have to recognize, and this is a countercultural shift, is that it's okay to need each other, that that's just how we were designed. And then I think the second thing that comes after that is to say, if that's how we were designed, how can we ensure that tech helps and doesn't hurt our human connection to each other? Technology that enables us to gather in person, to build stronger in-person relationships, that's great technology. Technology that substitutes and tells us, you know what, you don't need a friend, just talk to your AI chatbot. It'll tell you everything you need to know. That's not the kind of relationship that ultimately is going to help us thrive. So I think parents, I think young people, I think people across the board, you generally understand this. Doctors and nurses are seeing these challenges with technology every day as they care for patients. Teachers are seeing this challenge in the classroom. People are just looking to see what is a better path forward. And my worry is that with social media, people didn't see a path forward. And in fact, when I would travel around the world, parents would ask me all the time, they would say, well, if it's not safe, why is it free and allowable for our kids to use? That doesn't make sense. And you know what? They were right. It didn't make sense. And so I think the opportunity we have, and I think particularly with the AI Institute, is to say, how can we present a path forward that people can join and support? And how can we frankly do research differently? Because the things that we didn't do adequately with social media research is we didn't adequately fund research. We didn't organize research strategically, so we understood the map of what was needed and made sure research would happen in all the critical spaces. And we didn't ensure that the quality of the research was as high as it needed to be from the get-go. And frankly, the industry exploited those weaknesses to tell a story that was quite different ultimately from what the data is telling us now, which is that social media fundamentally is not safe for our kids.
Do you think that we can, in doing these, basically we're going to be the Consumer Product Safety Commission or the highway crash system, that tests cars before they go out. It's really how we compare it to like crash testing cars before they go out in the market, right? Or, because I can assure you, the current U.S. federal government will not do any of this, and they ain't going to do it for 3 years. They won't even consider it. So they're like not even worth discussing. And even if we pass legislation like this in California, it takes 3 or 4 years to actually get it going, right? People in England, like you, Melanie, you guys will get it faster. But in the U.S., we'll be slow. So my question is, how do we hold the kids said this repeatedly, hold the tech companies accountable. How do you hold them accountable for loneliness? Seriously. And for the products that they're intentionally created, they're creating to make money. They're not creating in order to make people unhappy. But they, as a byproduct of making money and in their arms race for attention, they do make people unhappy. How do you measure that, and how do you hold them accountable? I actually think that's what the young people are asking us repeatedly today.
Look, I think that there is no 100% substitution for having smart, thoughtful laws and regulations to
Yep.
hold companies accountable. That is absolutely necessary. But that is hard to get unless you also build the public support for it.
Yes.
And that's the piece where we have to do a much better job in public engagement and communication. And this kind of communication isn't just tell people what to go say to their representatives. This is actually bringing people in, bringing young people, bringing parents, bringing educators all in to say, help us understand what you're seeing. And let's collectively come up with a series of strategies and positions that we can advocate for, that we can see not just passed into law or put into regulation, but that we can start building into our norms in our workplaces and in our schools. Because here's the thing, if we look at other public health campaigns that have been successful in the past, take smoking, for example, it wasn't only laws that helped. Those are very important. Taxes on tobacco products, and other restrictions were important. But it was also a shift in norms that made smoking uncool, less desirable.
Right.
And that took place in everything from what we shot and didn't show in movies, to campaigns that we built for young people, to communities coming together to say, we're going to advocate for smoke-free spaces and places. That all started to shift norms. So policy shifts have to be accompanied by norm shifts. And norm shifts don't come through legislation. They have to come through the hard work of civil society coming together to say, we are going to choose something different. We're going to bring other people into those choices. And ultimately, we're going to move in a different direction together.
Hey, by the way, will you guys let me know when Margrethe is here? Is she here? Is the Prime Minister here? Yeah?
There's one last thing I think that's just important to say here about AI. Look, this whole conversation that we are having today obviously is about AI and youth and how to protect youth. But in my mind, this is actually bigger than AI. This is about fundamentally what makes us human. Because that's the question that AI is forcing.
I totally agree.
What makes us human? And in my mind, there are three critical things that we need to do as human beings to truly be human. We need to love, we need to serve, and we need to grow. We love through authentic human relationships, which technology cannot replace. We serve by helping one another. And we all know it feels different when a friend brings you soup when you're sick, or shows up to sit next to you when you've had a big disappointment, versus just having a machine deliver that soup for you without anybody knowing. But grow is important too, because as human beings, we need to be able to grow in our understanding of ourselves and each other, and our capacity to find meaning in difficult circumstances, and our ability to forgive, right? So love, serve, and grow are all fundamentally about meaning. And the conversation the world is having about AI right now is about, for example, what to do when jobs are replaced by machines. How do you replace someone's economic, output, their paycheck? But jobs give you more than a paycheck. They give you a role. They give you meaning. So this question about meaning is fundamentally what we have to grapple with. How do we protect, preserve, and nurture meaning in a world where machines seem to be taking over everything? And if we can grapple with that, if we can start to understand what our sources of meaning are, our relationships, the role we play in society, the service we render to others, then we can nurture those in school. We can do so in workplaces. We can value those and speak to those and encourage and demand that our representatives invest in programs that enable us to participate in serving one another, in building a real sense of community. So that's my optimistic hope, that this whole discussion on AI will not only lead to better policies and safer technology, but that it will open the door, that it will pull back the curtain on an important conversation we've needed to have for a long time, which is how do we fundamentally protect and celebrate what truly makes us human? Because if we can do that, then we can recognize that no matter whether you have 1 million followers online or have £1 million in your bank account, or if you're a young person who's just at the early stages of their career, or somebody who's toiling away in a workplace largely unknown to others, no matter who you are, you fundamentally have value as a human being because you have the ability to love, to serve, and to grow. So that's the message of humanity that I hope that our conversation on AI can help unleash in the world.
Woo! Okay. Thank you.